and the Association for Spiritual Integrity. Today, you will be hearing from myself and Phil, and we want to hear from you. You will see on the brochure that Rick Archer was supposed to speak, but he has a family illness, and so that has held him up. He won't be here today. The organisation was set up in 2018 because myself, Rick, and a colleague of ours, Craig Holiday, were at a conference. And the theme of the conference was something spiritual, nothing to do with human rights or abuse of power. But yet 3 of us spoke about the ethical crisis among spiritual leadership. So we got together. I was like, hold on, this is strange. 3 of us are talking about the same topic, which has nothing at all to do with the theme of the conference. So we had lunch together, and the Association for Spiritual Integrity was born out of that lunch meeting. It arose very organically from 3 of us wanting to do something more than talk about the problem. And so, if I were to say in one sentence what we are, we encourage accountability. And we give supports to enable accountability for ethical behaviour for spiritual leaders, teachers, educators. Our membership is open. It is free. People who identify as a spiritual leader in any capacity are welcome. So we have Pagan instructors, we have yoga teachers, we have coaches, we have rabbis that make up our almost 600 membership without any advertising. And so the need is there for people to be able to plug in to some system that helps them to do better, helps them to be better. It's not a very sexy thing to, I want to be a better person. I have a human side that needs support. This isn't cool by any means among spiritual leaders. And of course, there are people who don't understand what we are. That happens quite a lot. That if you look at like groups of students who want their teacher to be an outpost of the divine, who they want to deify their teacher, then there is that whole wave of, I suppose, younger souls who don't see that your teacher, has a human side, and that will always be evolving. And so we're misunderstood by people who need to deify and see perfection, or maybe project a parent onto their teacher. So that's there in the culture too. The other thing that makes us a little bit different, we're completely voluntary. We don't seem to have time to apply for core funding because there's so much we can do. And what we want to do is a few things really well. We're 5 years on the running, and so it's only now that we're really beginning to feel what we need to specialise in. Where are the greatest needs? I'll talk a little bit more after that, after Phil speaks a little bit there. What I wanted to add is, the thing that makes us different is that, if you look at the cultural paradigm of spiritual leadership, I saw many t-shirts saying something about the patriarchy, to, dissolve, break down the patriarchy of religion. And we don't work in that top-down hierarchical traditional model that is in religion or spirituality at all. We are spiritual leaders who want to get our act together. And we're helping each other and supporting each other to do this. And so when we falter, I'm just as accountable as anybody else. I might have the name of president on the board. However, I am just as accountable as every single member, where students of my own teaching work can say, hey, Jack O'Keefe, no, she didn't respect me, or she violated such and such a boundary, and the complaints can come in, and we have an independent group that focuses on mediation, restoration, but usually it's simply talking to the teacher, talking to the student, and the two do not want to meet. That tends to be the pattern of what happens in most cases. We get there, as the culture changes, we will get there to where people find their humanness as the richest point of connection, rather than the theory of scripture. You see? So we're making that shift in the culture to try and place humanity and humanness as a central shared value. The other thing that makes us a little bit different, that's non-hierarchical, is when we as a board or a team, because we have lots of volunteers who like, I want to help. We wouldn't exist without that. When something happens within us and somebody says, you left so-and-so off the hook, and is that because they're a board member, like at a webinar, for example, and something happens where we don't pick up something because we know somebody intimately, we kind of let them off the hook because we know their intention is good, but actually we need to have the same guidelines for every single body and watch our own boundaries and how we interpret those. So when something like that comes up and we get called out, we bring in an external facilitator. We did it earlier this year to like, how are we using power? Because power isn't a bad thing. It is your capacity to have impact on somebody else. However, how you use it is critical, and we want to be more self-aware, period. More aware of our humanness and our blind spots. We want to explore our shadow, and we have to model what we're advocating. Otherwise, it's a sham. And so that's why we are more of a, I don't know, can I kind of say a shared, horizontal organization. At every level, we're trying to be a we space in as much as we can, with all our blind spots, because that's what comes from we, noticing our blind spots all the time. So I'm Jack O'Keefe, I'm on the board, I'm one of the founding members, and Phil Goldberg came in slightly later onto the board. And Phil, would you like to speak? Thank you, folks.
Maybe I'll just...
Sure.
Thank you for coming. I hope the external noise isn't too disturbing. You're able to hear us okay? Because I'm not. I came aboard a couple of years ago because Rick, who's not here, is an old friend of mine, and I knew what ASI was doing. And Better? Okay. I knew what ASI was doing, and I knew it was important. And so one of the things we've been doing is having regular webinars, which we can talk about later, bringing in experts of different kinds. And so I attended one, and afterward said a few things based on my own research as an author and participant in the world of alternative spirituality for over 50 years. And I was asked to help with the wording of our code of ethics. And then I got hooked and was asked to be on the board, and so I am, and I do what I can. We can talk about that code. We'd love you to have a copy. And at first there was a thought that why should spiritual leaders need a code of ethics when it should all, right behavior should unfold naturally? And that there's a historical frame that maybe I could add to this. The world that we think of as spiritual but not religious, or what Harvard Divinity School is calling alternative spirituality, where we gave a presentation a month or two ago. A lot of its popularity and existence to the inflow of teachers and teachings from the East. The gurus who came, the Zen Roshis, the Lamas, all of those people introduced an element to spiritual development that had been largely missing. The internal area of internal spiritual practice and development. That has led to things like the contemplative Christian movement, Jewish mysticism coming out of the closet. But it was initiated by this flow of gurus, and I wrote a history of that. And in so doing, I thought I had because I lived through the 60s and 70s, I thought I had heard about all the group sex scandals. But then I kept discovering new ones. And it was so ubiquitous, I had to devote a whole chapter to it. It was a very hard chapter to write. And many of us were shocked by that back in the day. And the reason for it is important because one of the assumptions of these teachings is that inner spiritual development, that regular spiritual practice, would unfold the best of us. And we would naturally be more loving and kind and generous and passionate in our behavior. And to a large extent, that turned out to be true. People became better human beings. That's why psychotherapists recommend these practices now, whereas 50 years ago it was wacky. And so people do improve. But if you take that understanding and experience to another level, it becomes, with ongoing practice, ongoing development, you get better and better, more and more perfect. And at higher states of realization, what in the East is called enlightenment or awakening, then there's perfection. And those people are so in tune with divine will, divine intelligence, with the flow of the cosmos, that what they think, say, and do has a level of perfection that's beyond the ordinary standards of right and wrong. And that's where things broke down, because the teachers were assumed to have been at a certain level, so that when they were deified by followers and put on pedestals, that was the assumption. And the other assumption was that we would all attain that ourselves. So there was an incongruity when those teachers who were thought to have a level of perfection misbehaved and did things that by ordinary standards would be egregious and unethical and damaging and wounding to people. So they were rationalized that we can understand that in our lower level. There's a certain perfection in that, and what they did to those people was therefore a blessing. But after a while, the cognitive dissonance got a little too hard to deal with, and so everybody involved in that work went through turmoil, and thinkers started to try to explain this. All of which is to say, when I was writing about this, the book I'm referring to came out in 2010, I thought, well, we've learned all those lessons, so the seekers coming along now won't make the same mistakes. It turned out not to be true. There's new scandals erupting all the time. There's misbehavior among the descendants of those groups, the independent spiritual teachers, which are the focus of ASI's work. This vast network of people who are not connected to a lineage or an institution where there might be some accountability. And we all know that even in institutions, there's often not accountability. And we all know those stories. But in the world of independent teachers, unaffiliated teachers, they too get beautiful. And they too take advantage of their position on pedestals. And it keeps happening repeatedly. And the same rationalizations, the same excuses keep coming up. Hence, to her, on eternal credit, Jack and her colleagues started ASI to address these issues and say, well, you may have this very high level of consciousness, but you're still behaving like a jerk, and you're hurting people, and you're still human. And you still have karma, and you still have a personality, and you still can make mistakes. And therefore, things like adhering to a code of proper behavior and ethics is not beneath you. And we should all be doing that and all embrace that. And there should be systems, some mechanisms of accountability for when people, especially people who say, yes, I'll sign on to that, then go and sexually abuse a follower or misappropriate funds or do any number of harmful things. So that was a big part of the rationale for it. And the thing that it has to be wrestled with is, among many other things, this seeming disconnect between the truth that spiritual practice makes for better human beings. I've gone to a number of events here, and I keep thinking they're missing that piece. You know, if having a global ethic and having codes of behavior and right conduct were enough, the world's problems would have been solved 2,000 years ago. But so inner development does matter. It does make better people. Spiritual practice makes for better people. But perfection is a whole different story, and proper behavior still has to be something one thinks about and educates oneself about and holds oneself to. And that's a great deal of what we're about here. And I'll leave it to the professional psychologists and philosophers to reconcile. And there are many attempts, and many good ones. I don't want to get too theoretical about why higher states of consciousness and unfoldment of inner divinity can still lead to problems, maybe even cause problems if your ego is a little inflated by the status, which isn't supposed to happen, but it does. I'll end my intro with that. Turn it back to Jack. And you.
It took us 3 years to refine the code of ethics. And I'm using the word refine loosely because it's open to ongoing change and suggestions, and it has to be constantly evolving because we are constantly evolving as a race, I would hope. And so we did extensive consultation in order to try and find what is appropriate for our sector. We didn't know that we would be attracting more unaffiliated spiritual leaders than those who are connected to lineages and organizations. But the trend is the ones who are not connected to organizations are a lot more aware of the need of support. In organizations, the tendency, and I am generalizing here, I realize, the tendency is to be able to hide behind the role or the institution, or there's always somebody else higher up the ranking who can kind of take the flak if I screw up. So there's more of an opportunity to hide there. At the same time, we do have a chunk of members who've come from institutions and organizations, but when we look at this unaffiliated, non-lineage-based teachers, with the rise of social media, there was a whole new cultural shift where celebrity status is more potent than divinity status. And so if one is an effective influencer and has a little bit of a glimpse of the spiritual experience and something is seen, very quickly creates a website as a spiritual teacher and becomes a spiritual teacher. Very quickly. It's extraordinary. One glimpse. And somebody will say, oh, you should be a teacher. This is the world we live in. We have influencers who are spiritual teachers. I have a friend, Scott Edelstein. He's written some books, How to Find a Spiritual Teacher, Sex and the Spiritual Teacher, among others. And he's currently doing research on narcissistic personalities in the university in LA. And he has found that at least 15% of all spiritual leaders have narcissistic personalities. He has found that of all professions, spiritual leadership is where narcissists will go. Because the charisma is there, so you can have followers really quickly. The egocentric belief in yourself, the absence of humility is totally seen as being more godlike. So you can join the dots together. We have a lot of problems. And social media hasn't helped. It has given rise to great status being given and power being given to celebrity status, rather. So what do we do with that? I don't know. But we've started. So a code of ethics is the entry point to join the Association for Spiritual Integrity. But the code of ethics comes with accountability. And it's useless without accountability. And as students of teachers who are members have come forward, we have discovered that spiritual leaders are often not trauma-informed, haven't had any psychotherapy themselves, don't have any ongoing support. Some actually don't even have friends who are not students. And so imagine if you are a spiritual leader, you don't have any pool of friends who are not students, and you are interested in being sexually active. Where are you going to go to date? Where are you going to go? You might imagine that you're a little bit above a dating app. Many do. I couldn't do that. It would show that I'm human and I have needs. We can't go there. We're being a little bit facetious, but that is what we're looking at. And so we have the absence of friends who are not teachers being the source of sexual abuse. Power differential that is insurmountable between a teacher making a pass at a student. And I actually know of a yoga teacher who called me recently and she said, Jack, I don't know what to do about this phenomenon that is growing. I am teaching young people to be the next layer of yoga teachers, and this question is increasingly coming to me. If a guru asks me to sleep with them, doesn't it help my spiritual path? I'm supposed to sleep with them, aren't I? For my spiritual evolution. I'm not exaggerating. That has now become a norm and a given among young women particularly. That if they are asked, then it is a blessing. That's the crisis we're looking at. That level of abuse of power. It's kind of shocking. So some days, it's like this is Mount Everest of issues and problems, and where do we start? But we have to start somewhere, and accountability is part of it. We need to educate spiritual leaders. Yet many spiritual leaders believe that they don't need education because I sit in presence and it comes. And if I have a question, I bring it into the silence and it disappears. And if you've been doing that for 20 years, you kind of have forgotten how to reach out and say, actually, maybe I need psychotherapy. That is so far from your world and your value system that you don't do it. You simply don't do it. So the toxicity is built in such a way that it's perpetuating itself. Yeah, please, would you like to add something?
I just want to add that while our focus has been these independent, unaffiliated people, we're very aware that there are problems in institutional spirituality as well. And in my experience, even prior to ASI, there are a lot of people in ministerial and pastoral roles within institutions who also don't have peers to speak to because there's no mechanism for speaking honestly about the struggles they have inside, and if they fear being ostracized if they do, or if they see something going on in the institution or among the other teachers. They fear being ostracized, they fear being rejected, and if they are struggling with something inside, like, for example, an attraction to a member of the congregation or anything of that nature. They're reluctant to admit it because they know there may be consequences. So they struggle on their own. So this need for peer support and confidentiality and as an adjunct to their own spiritual development is not just among unaffiliated people. It's also within institutions. I've experienced this. I've had meetings with people, and I say, well, don't you have other clerics you can talk to? Oh, no. I never admit this to people. And that's why you're my friend. So I wanted to add that element.
Yeah. Of all the sentences, there's no one I can talk to, has been said. You know, Phil has heard it for years within his research, and I've heard it for years among my own colleagues. There's no one I can talk to. So that type of loneliness is not being addressed, not being admitted to, largely. So what we did was, okay, we need to set up some kind of peer support. So we looked at various models of peer support in industry, in not-for-profits. We thought, none of these are quite right for spiritual leaders. So we ran a pilot. We had 25 people volunteer in our first pilot run. So we broke them into six groups. One group actually is still continuing 3 years later. They're still meeting because it was so effective. And we met people in the middle for feedback, and we met people in the end and got feedbacks and surveys at the end. From the gatherings of that, we decided we'd run a second one, and then we'd have a model for peer support for spiritual leaders. But we became more interested in getting more detailed data, so we set up a system to have more meetings, feedback form after every meeting. So this time we had 44 people saying, yeah, I want to be part of the second peer support pilot project to find a model that works for us on an ongoing level. We broke them into 8 groups. We had people saying, yes, of course, I can facilitate. I've been facilitating groups for years and discovering not the basic skills of facilitation were ever learned, but 20 years of bad practice. Yet the spiritual leader says, I have facilitation skills. Of course I can listen. I'm listening to my students for the last 10 years. No listening skills. Not realizing it's a whole profession with specialist ways and techniques that have been proven to work. So we have like an arrogance among spiritual leaders, assuming that because I've done it for years, I have skills. Never realized you need to be trained to say you have skills. So we ran these 8 groups, and this summer we're in the middle of crunching the data, much more data. We've discovered a whole new layer of needs. So no matter, and this is kind of what I struggle with personally, is no matter what we discover is like, wow, this is a real need. Then I discover a more basic need, and a more basic need. How far upriver do we go before we kind of say, okay, we start from here? And we don't know yet how far upriver do we go, because there is a total absence of structured and organised training among people who have no lineage at all. And that's another reason that makes it a place of perpetuating bad practices. From professional skills to human development, to buying the Kool-Aid about I am an outpost of the divine and therefore I can do no harm. One thing that jumped out at me personally from this latest peer support was the inability for spiritual leaders to be vulnerable. Not only did they not know how to be vulnerable, if they hadn't trained as a psychotherapist, pretty much most, at least 80%, did not know how to be vulnerable, were scared of being vulnerable, and some were trying to learn how to be vulnerable during these 8 to 10 meetings. If you don't know how to be vulnerable, and you cannot share your own humanness, how can you cultivate an environment of safety for your students? How? If you haven't an awareness of that part of yourself. And so then there is a blind spot among those spiritual leaders around the human development of their students. So how can the emotional maturity of the students be cultivated? It cannot, because the emotional maturity isn't there for the teachers themselves. And so we are looking at students who are going through the ranks, will be endorsed as teachers, as this current wave of unaffiliated teachers, who have never looked at their own emotional maturity, who don't realize that they need support for themselves as people, as an ongoing thing. So let's push it into the carpet. Yes, I see a hand up.
Is it gender related?
Is it gender related? No. No. Would you like to add to that? Is it gender related?
Well, let's put it this way.
Hold the mic much closer.
Male leaders seem to be a lot more prone to sexual misbehavior than female.
Vulnerability.
The vulnerability factor probably is. I would think there's a certain magic factor in being a guy who's adored for his charisma and ability. I don't know. It may be that women are much more able naturally and easily because of their training to enter into spiritual leadership and have a certain vulnerability and a certain openness that men would be less likely to have. But I don't think it's necessarily that simple. And Jack,
yeah, it's funny because I completely agreed with Phil, and I'm closer to that peer support project, looking at the data from this current one, and we have found that women are unable to be vulnerable too. It's cross-gender. The vulnerability is cross. There's no gender-specific thing there.
One other thing that we should mention, most of our our membership, as Jack said, is free, and anybody who identifies as a spiritual leader can join and say, I agree to observe these or similar principles. But we also have institutional membership that we added so that organizations can become institutional members of ASI. So I wanted to make sure those of you who have such affiliations, we really welcome that to demonstrate this broad-based support for such things.
And our membership is global, which gives us an interesting cultural viewpoint also. And we have found now this is just from example. I can't say the specific data. Maybe it's a coincidence. However, something that has caught my attention is that students from the US, they tend to be more buying the Kool-Aid, knowing that there's something wrong, but not knowing what's wrong. In Canada and in Europe, the students are saying, where is the humanness? They have that level of discernment. I can't explain what that is, but Canadian and European are saying, where's the humanness? They're hiding something. I can smell it. They're hiding something. This is all facade. This is marketing. I'm not buying it. This is the younger generation, totally onto it, able to see through, 50 and 60-year-old spiritual leaders who have a huge following, but they're like, I'm not buying this BS, this facade. Whereas the US tend to be bowing at the feet still. I'm not sure why that culture is, but it's just interesting to note that's the trend. Another thing that we offer is, at the beginning, it enthralled us when we were having our board meetings, looking at what have we noticed, and let's share our own information. We noticed that our spiritual path has pulled our mind inward. And we've spent a lot of time sometimes in silence spent a few years in silence, social silence. A lot of time meditating and disconnecting from the world, because that's what you do for deep realizations. You see through the illusion of the world. And so how can you take it seriously? So you dial out. You stop watching the news. You stop keeping up with things. And while we were going within, our sector, spiritual leaders, We missed industry going ahead, creating law around sex trafficking, around sexual harassment, around what human resources were doing around respectful boundaries. We missed it. We're way behind. And as a result, spiritual leaders with wisdom are rarely involved in political things around helping our planet. Why isn't working with our planet part of spiritual leadership? Like, we're in bodies. Like, you need food to have a body. Isn't it kind of an automatic thing to weave in protection of our planet? But it's not. And the traditions of going within have encouraged us to be a little bit too disconnected from the outside world. Now, that was appropriate when we had ashrams and institutions got this wave of independent spiritual teachers, unaffiliated, that is becoming more and more the populace of spiritual leadership. We don't have supports, access to the outside world. We don't have checks and balances of, like, how do you now connect with the outside world? Or do you want it both ways? You're in the world, of the world, however, you're not up to speed with codes of good practice that are of the world. And this is what we found. It's like cherry picking. You know, I'm in the world, I'm not wearing a robe, therefore I'm very cool, I'm one of you. However, I'm not up to speed with basic human needs and human rights. So there is these complexities that are layering themselves. How deep do we go? How it's huge, the amount of work that's to be done so that we can change the paradigm of spiritual leadership for our children. Really. We're noticing these changes, and I'm driven by something. We all are in the ASIs, but we have to do something. We can't sit by and let beautiful scripture be misinterpreted in this way and lead to bad practices, to where there is no respect for even law, because this is above the law. I've heard spiritual leaders say. Yes. Would you like a microphone, or would you like to come up?
I can project.
Great.
And I don't know if you're waiting for if your Q&A is going to be fronted like afterwards or not.
We're just going with whatever happens. Yeah.
First thing, I'd like to comment in regards to you had mentioned ego.
Can everybody hear him? Okay.
I mean, I can.
Please stand up. The acoustics are horrible.
Yeah.
We could all gather closer together.
Yeah, this is one of those critical things in Parliament that you may want to let them know. You had mentioned ego being a strong factor in kind of some of spiritual leaders' decision making, or perhaps the clouding of judgment. I'll personally say that I once received what I thought was a compliment of I would make a great cult leader. It was because of the fact that I, at the time, had pretty good communication skills, and I realized that I'm aware that I do have a fairly large ego, but a bruised one. And I think that a lot of spiritual leaders have this. They do have the ego, but it's in disrepair, and this. I don't have a background in psychotherapy or psychology or anything like that, but my assumption is that they're also in a place where they feel that in order to patch that brokenness, they're utilizing their own congregations and their own spiritual followers. That was one comment. The question I have is coming from pagan traditions. Paganism largely is decentralized. We don't have a central authority, and so we do have a lot of unaffiliated leaders. And there are some organizations, including my own, that we do have a clergy program, and I'm one of their clergy coordinators. And so we're crafting our program from scratch, and we do have a section in our clergy manual regarding mandated reporting, and we do have our own code of ethics. Does Does ASI provide any sort of training or a program for organizations that they can adopt in order to then disseminate into any of their spiritual leadership programs?
Yeah, great question.
I would follow you.
Yeah.
Follow me to my seat.
At the end of this year, we will have something specifically for our member organizations. We want organizations to have a code of ethics. Use ours if you don't have one yourself. As long as there's a code of ethics with a system of accountability. Because the code of ethics is just, oh, this sounds lovely, but you know, with the code of ethics, it's asking you to up your game. And so there has to be checks and balances. We're working with the Right Use of Power Institute. It's a fantastic educational organization in Boulder. And I've studied with them over several years now. We're working with them for them to create a course around the right use of power within organizations. And their content is really good. That can be rolled out, I'd say, this spring, I'm hoping, for organizations, yeah.
I would add to that, that's aspirational, and it's something Jack and others are working on, but we would also welcome the input of organizations like yours, so we could learn how successful programs have been instituted in other organizations. We were just at Harvard Divinity School had this conference on use and abuse of power and what they call alternative spiritualities. And while we were there, we presented, but there was a lot of wonderful input from other people, and we learned a great deal from organizations, people representing organizations about how they're working with this and how they are instituting programs so congregants and spiritual students can make their voices heard if there's something coming up, and how people. So we have a lot to learn as well. We welcome institutions and individuals who can contribute.
And one thing we started doing from the get-go was having webinars about every 6 weeks, because we were wondering, how are we going to get experts from fields that we would have known about if we were in the industry or we had a different career? How do we get input to solid information to a group of people who think they know it all? You know, what do we do? And so we have these webinars. So like our last webinar, just a couple of weeks ago, was with an attorney who specialises in supporting women who have been sexually abused by spiritual leaders. And we've had Black Rights Movement women speak about DIBE and what we should do in order to make our congregations less homogenous, less white, really. And so we're bringing in education in this way into a community setting. So the way we have discovered works is that we bring in an expert, and 6 weeks later we have a community discussion, and then we bring in an expert, and then we have a community discussion. So that we're creating a sense of belonging and getting the culture of our membership used to having peers and asking questions. And we do have this thread of talking about our shadow, trying to encourage talking about our shadow. Yet, in every webinar, we will have somebody who says, why are you doing this? Why did you just sit in presence and these questions disappear? And there's the spiritual bypass. You know, it's like, there it is. It comes up every time. I think it comes up every time, actually.
There's always somebody.
There's always somebody in our live meetings who, cannot see they're advocating bypassing. But it's beautiful, you know, nobody calls them out. It's like, there it is. That's part of our culture too. You know, so I use it as a reminder to do not bypass, Jack. Do not bypass. Don't use any scriptural text to negate or cancel any human emotion or question or person expression. Let there be space for all of it. It is holistic. Integrity is what we're about. Wholeness in every aspect. You know? Yes, you had your hand up for a while. Would you like to come up to the mic? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll bring you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, so I'm a sociologist, and I have a couple of responses to what you're saying. First of all, it's very good. I agree with you totally. There needs to be accountability, and and clearly in many places there is not. The moral conduct, the moral code, I think is also a very good idea. What I kind of am questioning is there is a trend I'm a sociologist. There's a little bit of academic conflict with psychologists. And all of society, it seems, has adopted all the psychology rigmarole. Let me put it that way. And I'm a sociologist. Sociologists don't go for any rigmarole. So so my question is, it's not really a question. I guess I'm kind of, well, maybe it is a question. But I have to have another topic about prison. I'll come back. So my question here is, if things become too rigorous, too institutionalized, or maybe that is my other question, then maybe we lose something. So in study of religion, sociologists study of religion, there are groups who emphasize authority by tradition, by education, by ordained ministers, etc., etc. There is another tradition, which is the charismatic tradition, which is the spirit. So it's kind of like two sides to a coin, I think. You need a tradition, but you know what? We need that charisma, because that's where, and we need to get outside of the box, and we need to disobey all the rules, because that's where social change comes from. So if you put all that into a box, you're going to be stuck. I don't know. That's my response to. I don't know if I have a question, but that's my response.
This is great. Hang on to the mic for a second if you can, because we don't have a sociologist in our team, so I'm hungry to learn from you.
I dropped out of graduate school.
You dropped out of graduate school. Phil, would you mind going back? So how do we, from your professional perspective, how do we avoid putting ourselves into a box? Yeah, it's tricky.
I think it's as a sociologist, sort of. It's kind of like the dogma of religion. You know, if you get too tied up in the dogma, it gets too strict, right? So you have to have a breathing space somewhere.
Yeah. I'm hoping that the emphasis of ongoing growth, the fact that a code of ethics is ongoing, I'm hoping that it allows us to evolve. Someone would like to speak. Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant thing you brought up, because of all this whole phenomenon of unaffiliated spiritual seekers and independent teachers, those are all people who left boxes. But then they can create their own box. We might be in danger of creating boxes that would then have to be transcended. And we hope we have the flexibility and a sense of balance to do both. Because I don't know what Robert Belling would say about this issue. And he was the great sociologist of religion. But there must be some ongoing sensitivity to evolving and learning and growing and changing and innovating, while at the same time maintaining standards that seem to work. Not an easy thing, so we're sensitive to it.
I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to ask you to read your code of ethics and see the response of the community to feel, does it feel like a box, or are these the way deep core roots of humanity that are reflected in your code of ethics, to see how that would show up with the group.
Yeah. Could we just randomly read 3 or 4 maybe? Because that's 26.
Or maybe hold off, because there's some other questions.
Because some of the questions are great. Would you like to come up? Yeah. Thanks so much.
So the question of the issue of boxes is really key, I think, to the whole question. What you're doing, I mean, what you're doing is great. It's really needed. And then when the question of boxes comes up, that's really key to what you're doing, because when you look, so I'm kind of looking at the big picture and the evolution of humanity through all of this. So what's happened over a long period of evolution is we've created so many boxes that not all people are comfortable in even any one of them, or whatever. But through our evolutionary process, we've gotten to the time in our evolution where somehow we need to be able to create a box that contains all of humanity. And the question is that possible? And that, in a way, is maybe what the 1993 Global Ethic was trying to do. So I'm curious as well how close your code of ethics is to the Parliament's global ethic, and because they have to come together as well on a collective level and the individual level. So I think our challenge is creating that one box that can contain all of humanity.
Just think it's very aspirational from where I'm at.
If I may be permitted a commercial, I have a podcast called Spirit Matters, and I interview people. One of my recent interviews is with Bob Atkinson, who you can tune in and hear more from.
I think it's a great point. But I have to stew on it. Yeah. Kind of does something to my brain, you know? Yeah. Big picture, small picture, and one within the other. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as like boxes and being in and out of boxes, and so what we see a lot in paganism, I'm a Wiccan clergy, have been for 25, almost 30 years, and so what we see is we're all unaffiliated. A lot of us, most of us are unaffiliated, and in Wicca in particular, and I think paganism in general. I think our brother here, he's a heathen brother, can speak to this as well. A lot of people that are drawn to paganism in particular are fleeing what they consider organized religion, religious trauma, sexual trauma, all kinds of different types of things that they are fleeing from. So we have a particular issue in paganism especially because we're unaffiliated, we may be untrained, we may not have the psychosocial skills to hold space for these folks. So we build things like resource lists so we can point them to the right therapy and things like this and still hold space for them as their clergy. So when I saw this talk this morning as an unaffiliated member of leadership, I was like, yes, we need this. We need something like this. But back to boxes, People are fleeing boxes. And I think as we go further and further into the 21st century, we're going to continue to see more and more people fleeing the boxes. So it is a fine line, and it is a balance that has to be established between building that foundation and that structure, which is absolutely essential, especially to folks that are coming in from another path, especially if they're coming in traumatized. They need that safe space. We provide safe space through structure, right? And then we need to let them still be able to go their own ways, so they flourish and grow and hold space for that. So here's a box, and here's a bigger box, and here's a bigger box, and then am I still your priestess? Because at some point, you become your own spiritual person. I think in the pagan community, at least, that's where we get into the danger area. We have a lot of people just going off on their own. We have a whole new generation of people that are saying, I don't need a teacher, I don't need priesthood, I've got TikTok, and I've got Facebook and Instagram, and that's where I'm going to learn everything I need to know. And that's a major, major loss, not just for those of us that are leaders, who know that we have wisdom, and guidance, and leadership to share for seekers. It's like, great, you're interested in your spirituality, but you don't think you need anybody who's gone before. Right? And for those of us who no longer have our elders, even though I'm lineaged, my elders are no longer here. So that you were speaking earlier about peers and things like that. So I think that we really do need to get collective as unaffiliated leaders, regardless of our religion or our spiritual path, and be here for each other. Yes, because we got to figure out how to deal with these boxes or lack thereof. Yeah. Thank you. That's what I'm going to talk about.
Thank you. Yeah. And this brings up another thing we're very conscious of, and we reach out to people like you for help with, but it becomes increasingly clear that one of the things that's needed is education for spiritual seekers as they come along. So they're protected. So they have resources and information about how to find an appropriate spiritual teacher, how to find community without getting enmeshed in a destructive cult, how to retain their independence and their freedom of thought and discernment, and at the same time learn from people who know more than they do, because we all need that. And so finding educational resources for this growing population of independent seekers and unaffiliated spiritual but not religious people is a very important task. It's not something we're equipped to do, but we would love to participate with others in creating such resources. So we welcome input on that.
Yeah, we have a small group at the moment to create a course for students around recognizing the red flags, but it's in-house, you know. The first organization to join the ASI was a Wiccan group from Scotland. Yeah, I don't know how people find us, but they do, and they found us, you know. I was just thrilled. I'm like, yes, it's great, you know. One other thing that's in the pipeline is that we've discovered that we all want to do the right thing. It's like when I read the Code of Ethics that you're really speaking about here, like what's the alignment between the Code of Ethics of the Parliament and ourselves? Like, I'm like, where's the accountability? How can, it's aspirational otherwise, but where's the accountability? And what we have found is that even though spiritual leaders know that there is an accountability built in when they sign up to the Code of Ethics, many sign up because, oh, this is a good thing. Of course I respect people's rights. Of course I don't abuse of power. Of course I don't, you know, mix up seva, selfless service, with free labour. Of course of course. Not realising you have to self-reflect and you have to up your game. So what we have to do is we're going to create videos for each of the tricky tenets of the Code of Ethics to say, this is asking you to up your game. This is what this means. Because we're so used to, that's a good thing, I'll tick the box, I'll sign the petition. But does any change actually happen? Rarely. Rarely. Which really shocked us, you know? Yes.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I am an author, and I am wondering if you have any code of ethics on plagiarism or using people's phraseology, because I see this a lot in leadership, the spiritual leadership that's interested in language that works for them, and then you start seeing little memes pop up that are actually yours.
Well, as somebody who's been plagiarized, I'm on board. I have seen my own words appropriated many times. It's not part of that code of ethics, but maybe it's something.
It would be a really good idea. I love it. Yeah, I really love it. Thank you. Yeah, and maybe we can be in touch so that we could kind of suggest wording and we put it to the community. We always do community consultation if we're changing something as basic as our code of ethics. I think it's a great idea. I was asked to write an endorsement for a book once that was a complete synopsis of my first book. Yeah, I mean, it was a synopsis of my first book. Okay? That was extraordinary.
I've actually been plagiarized, not just misquoted, but things lifted from my books into academic papers. That's even more egregious to me because they're held to very high standards.
From your words, I'd love to hear more about what accountability is in your life. Because I agree with the concept, but I really would like to hear what it's your.
Yeah. I would say something different in a year from now. Being willing to have others give their point of view on whether you're walking your talk or not. So that requires vulnerability, it requires openness, it requires an ability to receive feedback. A willingness to grow and change and to be mature enough to hold your own so that you can see your behavior and to take responsibility for it. So it requires a certain emotional maturity. Not always there.
It's a difficult issue. I mean, we've struggled with this. We're not the AMA. We're not the American Psychological Association, where if a psychotherapist sleeps with a patient, we can impose sanctions of certain kinds. We can't de-license, some spiritual teacher who has a following. We can't do any of those kinds of things. So it's difficult. So we're relying on the goodwill of people, and maybe you can describe.
Yeah, it's more a preventative organization, really. You see, so it's like, hey, it has to become normal for us to have all this respect about whether or not we're walking our talk. It has to become normal to receive feedback. And, like in the code of ethics, is be willing to set up a system of feedback and be willing to receive feedback. Does it happen? Rarely.
We're very young at the same time, but we've had complaints from spiritual. My teacher is doing this and doing that, but the teacher's not a member of ASI, so
that happens a lot.
We're even less.
Can't do anything.
Nothing. There's nothing we can do except refer them to resources, psychotherapists, and people like that. When we have had complaints about people who are members, we tried to put them together and have some kind of reconciliation process where the person can be heard and listened to, responded to appropriately. We're working on all that.
Yeah, I naively thought that our complaints team, the complaints team that deals with these breaches of the code of ethics by our member teachers, and naively thought, they meet the teacher, they meet the student, and mediate, we get a professional mediator to come between them. Talk about naive, The teacher might meet with us, but is usually very guarded, very defensive, doesn't have the tools or skills to actually oh, I want to learn, I want to grow. What happened? I didn't see something. No recognition that we all have shadow. This is an opportunity for you to grow. The recognition largely isn't there. So, as I said earlier, whatever assumption we've made, it's like the needs are so much more basic. You know, the learning and the training needs are so much more basic. So we've never actually had an agreement between a student and a teacher where both agree to mediation. The teacher might want mediation, the student might want mediation, but never the twain have met so far. Our sociologist friend is there, hand up there.
I would add that we have to be very aware that there are rewards in being a spiritual leader and a teacher. There's money to be made in many instances. There's status. There's huge ego inflation. And so complaints about behavior and being asked to be held accountable, there's resistance. There's who are you to, step in and what I do. I didn't do it. I mean, we see this in public life all the time. But with spiritual leaders, there's this extra element of, there's a different kind of pedestal. Yeah. And it's intoxicating to be on a pedestal for many people. And so therefore there's resistance to anything that might be perceived as bringing them down a notch. It's a delicate thing.
Yeah.
And I was just going to point out the other side is if you're in a charismatic situation, which is kind of what you're talking about, there's a kind of groupthink. So members are not going to criticize. So I would suggest your idea of accountability as being willing to getting feedback is a non-starter, which is kind of what you said already.
They're coming. I believe it will come because you know, even when a student makes a complaint about a teacher, and it's actually the student's projection. The student was looking for their mother, not this female teacher, really. The needs were just ridiculous, you know? I'd hold a space for the student and work with them to try and help themselves, and hold a space for the teacher. There's always a learning for the teacher. Always, always, always. There's some little grain of growth that will come from the teacher being in this process of accountability, even when the content that brought them there hasn't any potency.
So there is one other situation, which is what I was going to mention. Sorry, I didn't bring it up at the same time. But the ones who complain, who see the errors consistently, are usually the ones who leave.
Yes.
But right. Then you have the problem. They make up other stuff, and they, as you were saying, yes. So then their complaints sometimes are unreasonable.
Yes, that's right. That happens too. But I think with feedback, we need to make it somewhere. We have to bring in reflection, where we turn it into a hierarchical, into a wee space where we're helping each other's human growth. And so if feedback, we offer model feedback forms for people to adapt and personalize them so that every teacher has a feedback form on their contact page. There's rarely it happens, but I'm going to keep plugging it, because if we can introduce, even if we can make that something that every ASI member does, to there is a place of where I'm allowing people and I feel safe enough for people to tell me their opinion. It can't be that, 10 people said the same thing. Is it still projection? Is it all projection? Maybe the penny will drop eventually. I'm hopeful.
And we're very aware of the fact that there's a certain self-selection in this. So spiritual leaders who would join ASI and become members and say, yes, I want to observe a code of ethics, and I'm open to feedback, and if anything happens, I want to... They're not the people who need this the most.
Yeah.
The people who need this the most are the ones who are saying, I'm above all this crap, who the hell are you? I'm, at a level of perfection. I'm beyond right and wrong. Don't tell me how to behave. I'm walking with God. And, they're not joining.
Yeah. So I've been told, no, it's too dualistic. It's too of the world. I don't function in that way. I can't sign up to code of ethics. It's too of the world. I've been told that, and I've been told actually by a very famous unaffiliated teacher that no, I was part of a group when I was in school and I got bullied and I will never join a group. I'm like, well, so that hurt that bleeds through your work because hurt people. That will come through some way, in your message. And he glazed over. Just didn't know what I was talking about. So yeah, it's kind of scary who our, young people are looking to for spiritual leadership. Dissociation. I mean, there's an awful lot of dissociation, and people who have had spiritual awakenings because of dissociation, because they're not in their bodies looking at their own trauma in the first place. And so, of course, where they're going to other dimensions, where they're seeing other things. There's a thin line between spiritual awakening and psychosis, actually. And a mild version of it can be a spiritual awakening. And then you become a spiritual teacher, but you're actually not in your body at all. Your body's full of trauma. We have that rampant. There's a lot to be done, huh?
So I did have a suggestion.
Yes, please.
So just as we are talking, it comes to my mind that what might work is if you develop a model of interaction between some kind of a model. A model is just a way that it might work, and instead of calling it feedback, it's a small thing, but maybe concerns. A lot of times leaders are willing to hear concerns of their followers.
I like that.
And that can be a way. It's any channel is probably good.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you. Yes.
May I just really quickly comment on the box issue?
Yeah.
Come on, you can do it.
Talk about rejection with advice. You had mentioned, and I'm sorry if I don't mean to put you in the limelight right now, but you had mentioned that the idea of the charismatic tradition and the and certain spiritual modalities that encourage or even require the idea of charisma or whatnot. And I don't believe that this particular model necessarily goes against that or tries to kind of break down said box. It's more of if you are in that box, such as, and it could be any example, it would be once you're in whatever box you're in, and whoever's in that box with you, make sure they're safe. Make sure you're also doing what you're supposed to do. We all have abuse. There's always abuse of power. The whole Spider-Man thing with great power comes great responsibility. And it seems to me that ASI is what you guys are trying to do is kind of wherever it is that you live, that spiritual home that you live in. Make sure you have a strong foundation, things don't crumble, and if there are some cracks in the foundation, make sure to fix it as opposed to ignore it, because as a recent first-time homeowner, the biggest advice that was given to me, if you see something that's slowly deteriorating, don't ignore it, because more and more will pop up inevitably, and then you'll just find yourself in a crumbling home. And the last thing that I wanted to add is the idea of you had mentioned kind of you have statistics and data that you're trying to collate. My mind is not geared for that. So my hope is that a lot of that information that is gathered in back accounts, I'm hoping that ASI is able to bring it to the foreground in kind of like really sizable bite-sized chunks that allow people to kind of grasp at that data and kind of, disseminate that also to their peers as well. So that if I, for instance, see somebody in my program who is in distress or otherwise unsure of certain things, that we can forward them to certain things. Like I know that there are times where we instruct our clergy, hey, if there are certain situations, for instance, when we have, if you're doing it sort of lay counseling, if you see those red flags of somebody is in, speaks on particular traumas that are psychological, sexual, physical, we're not equipped. We, at least in the United States, we have laws that, you have to call professional authorities. You have to, sometimes you have to call 911, and stuff like that. And so I want to make sure that the ASI's program, especially for individuals, allows people to also carry that information forward.
I would also add that we have great limits. We have no financial resources, no staff, or anything. But one thing we would hope to do in the future is use the website to be a kind of resource base. So other groups who have things to add, or if there are journal articles, if there are newspaper or magazine pieces that we can, or links to other people's websites where this ongoing process of learning from one another that is so necessary, that perhaps we can have kind of clearinghouse or resource base that so like if what you just described is codified somewhere online, we could link to it, and that could be part of the resource.
And just because this was requested, I'm just going to read random 3 from the Code of Ethics for Individuals. Treating students' questions, concerns, doubts, and experiences with respect, and never trivializing or dismissing their inquiries. Being honest and transparent regarding our professional business and financial matters. Not seeking or presuming exalted privileges or glorified status because of our role as spiritual leaders. Never abusing the trust of students to obtain sexual gratification, money, free labor, or other personal benefits. So we have, I'm conscious we have 10 minutes, we have some cards here that would be a place for you to write your suggestions. I would love to give you the opportunity to, I will watch this recording and gather your thoughts, but if there's something that, this would really help the organization, please send me your name and email if it's something I can follow up with, or just give us your suggestions, and we have some literature here and QR codes, so you can find us easily.
And we would encourage you to go to the website and see what membership means. There's no obligation or charge or anything. We feel there's benefit in having numbers of people say yes to what we're hoping to represent, individually and institutionally. Anybody have a problem with any of the ones Jack read?
No problem. Thank you very much for all this time.
Thanks for coming. We had some trepidation about 8 o'clock in the morning, but we're honored that you joined us.
May I add one more point, please?
All right.
I served on the board of an organization which I will not name, and we went through a very long, complicated process to develop ethical guidelines for our leaders, and circulated it. Had to, did like focus groups and did the whole extensive process with it. And one of the, and this is in old organizations, one of the sticking points was there are people who did things 30, 40, 50 years ago that they probably wouldn't do now.
Yeah.
And there wasn't an understanding back then. And so then the question that is still in my heart about that is, how do you repair an organization after that? I was on the board, and so do we have to unearth it like a #MeToo movement? And does that really damage the organization? Does it help? Does it heal? And then, how do I say this? I think one of the things that we came to is prevention is the best. And so peer relationships among the leaders, and the leaders to say to somebody, hey, really? Really? You're thinking of that? You just, so I'm sorry I came in late because I couldn't find you, and maybe you already said this. But having, the problem of unaffiliated leaders who don't have peer support, and really even small organizations really encourage the leaders to find a peer group to hold each other accountable, because prevention, catching it early because once the damage is done to the individuals and the institution, whether it's a small one or a huge one, the damage is done, so accountability through peers who really hold each other accountable. And then, does it help to unearth the old stuff? I don't know. I'm still sitting with that one.
Jack, you want to address
Yes, I would always go for unearthing. Deep, total, full honesty. That value is either central or not. And
I was raised Catholic, so, whoa.
Yeah. I unearth anything, expose whatever it is where there's pain. There's something about the ripple effect. Even if those who are abused are no longer on the planet, even if that's the case, there's something energetic about and freeing about changing the pattern for all. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. When we stop hiding our dysfunctions, we help everybody.
And I would add, first of all, I want to say we did address the issue of peer support. And if you go to our website, you'll learn what we're hoping to do. There's, at this very moment, I'm involved, and others are, with the unearthing of abusive behavior that happened 50, 60 years ago, just finally coming out about certain spiritual teachers. And that this issue of, is this just going to be more damaging? Or are you going to re-wound people? That can be such an easy excuse to keep it buried. That, and there's some validity to it. It's in the past, the person's dead. Why bring it up now? Why, we've moved forward and all that. It's very easy to do. You see it happening in politics right now. And in spiritual circles, it's, why ruin the mission and all that. But I agree with Jack. If it's not brought out, it's festering, and it's there in the DNA, it's there in the bloodstream of the organization. People are burying it, people are not talking about it. The air needs to be clear. And if there is a future for these organizations, it will be on a different footing, as opposed to, a fraud or a kind of massive denial.
And that's the culture we're trying to change, from hiding and putting it under the carpet to what are the supports that are needed in order for it to be different. So setting up those supports is essential because the goodwill to be more honest isn't enough. Because we have no structures in our society to support that.
And needless to say, I mean, one of the obvious points about that is if it's not unearthed, it's much more likely to happen again.
It will. It has to. Yeah. So thank you for your time, folks. Thank you for coming to hear us speak about the ASI. Please take a piece of literature, and I would love maybe scribble your suggestions and put them into my hand so that I make sure I have all of your thoughts and great feedback.
And we have a booth, a table number 450, so if you want to drop by and chat.
Thank you, everybody.